everybody, welcome to a video. I'm going to be talking about this 50mm lens. It's a 1.4 aperture Carl Zeiss lens. It's a prime lens that does not have autofocus. It comes from sort of the classic lineup of lenses that Carl Zeiss sells. Most of them are used now at this point in the market stage. They come in the 50mm version, the 35, I think 28 or 25, and also 85, and maybe higher up. But the point is, you can get these used for a relatively good deal. B&H sells them for about $450 used, give or take. So the question is it worth it? The reason I'm asking this is because I happen to have a handful of vintage lenses laying around that are also roughly 55mm in focal length. This is a 55mm Fujinon lens that is pretty old. It doesn't have any kind of digital or automation in it, meaning it's all manual. The aperture ring is also manual. You do have to buy adapters for these lenses, and I will have more details in the description. Here I have an adapter for the Canon EF mount with a confirmation chip on it that's programmable. And then I have a Yashica lens next to this one. This is a 50mm 1.9, also a fairly cheap lens that you can get on eBay and stuff. Also same situation with the Yashica lens, you have to have a Canon EF adapter that preferably with a confirmation chip. The confirmation chip, what it does is allows the camera sensor to tell you when the autofocus is lined up, kind of beeps at you like you have with the Carl Zeiss lens from factory. Setting up these chips is a whole different topic. You can probably dig around YouTube to find out, or I perhaps might make another video about how to program these chips with the Canon camera. But yeah, back to the topic. So you can get this lens right now for about 40 bucks on eBay, this one even less. So is it worth spending 10 times as much money on a Carl Zeiss lens or not? Well, today I'm going to focus mostly on sharpness. I know that that's not the only part that matters about a lens. There's a lot of other features that people look at, bokeh, aberration, stuff like that. But to make things a little more simple and definitive, I want to focus on sharpness, especially at wide open aperture. Most of us that buy 50mm lenses, we want to take portraits of people, or I don't know, whatever it may be. We want to be able to separate our subject from the background with a beautiful, narrow depth of field. And that's achievable by the really wide apertures that the lens come with. However, if they're not sharp at wide open, or even unusable, then what's the point? We can shoot at 3.2, we can shoot at 4, but we really want to shoot at a wide open aperture, don't we? So let's see how this lens, the Carl Zeiss, compares with these cheap vintage lenses on a side-by-side test. So here we have the Carl Zeiss lens fully open at 1.4. I'm using Elmo as the subject. I'm about 4.5 feet away from Elmo right now. I'm trying to keep it the same for all the comparisons. Fujinon is fully open here at 1.8, slightly different aperture, but it's fully open. And right after this we have the Yashica 50mm lens fully open at 1.9. They all have a radial blur and really pretty bokeh in my opinion. And now I'm going to start comparing them side by side. So here we have the Zeiss fully open on the left and the Fujinon fully open on the right. I'm zoomed in a little bit and we're seeing a lot more sharpness on the Fujinon lens. Further to prove that, with the same aperture of 1.8, the Zeiss still isn't quite as sharp as the Fujinon lens. And I'm going to go ahead and compare it with the Yashica now. Yashica has, in my opinion, more sharpness than the Zeiss lens. Also, the Yashica and the Zeiss tend to have very similar color technology in terms of contrast. Here's the Fujinon on the right, and I'm seeing a lot less highlight exposure on the Fujinon than on the Zeiss. Now at aperture 2.8, things get a little better for the Zeiss. It becomes more sharp. And one thing to note, the Zeiss has 9 iris blades, while the Fujinon and the Yashica only have 6. So you'll notice that the bokeh is a lot more round on the Zeiss compared to the hexagonal bokeh on the Fujinon and the Yashica lens. Here we have the Yashica, you can see even more hexagonal bokeh. Both lenses are looking really sharp. And now bringing it up to, or down to aperture 3.2, closing the aperture a little more, the Zeiss becomes really sharp. Fujinon also staying very sharp, and they're starting to look really similar now. Same goes for the aperture 4.0. And just to see the Yashica, how it compares. The reason there's a slightly different zoom is because the Fujinon is a 55mm lens versus 50, so it zooms in a little bit more. And at Aperture 5.6, things get really sort of the same in terms of sharpness. You're just starting to see the background more clear. It's not as blurred out anymore. Still noticing the similarities between the color and the contrast with Zeiss and the Yashica lens. And now Aperture 8, and that's as small as I'll go. The Fujinon and Zeiss are both incredibly sharp. In fact, I think the Zeiss looks better at Aperture 8 than the Fujinon. And here we have the Yashica, which also has very similar color and contrast. And I'm going to go ahead and stop here at Aperture 8. In summary, if you're okay with using fully manual lenses that require adapters for Canon, I would highly suggest you guys look into these. They're very affordable, they're all over eBay and stuff, and these aren't the only ones out there. There's a lot of other models if you've looked, a lot of other brands for sale, and feel free to try them out. When it comes to this Carl Zeiss 50mm lens, don't get me wrong, Carl Zeiss is a great company. In fact, I'm using their 35mm lens on the camera right now, and that lens happens to be fully sharp at wide open aperture, unlike this one. So, you know, if this lens was much sharper at Aperture 1.4 or Aperture 1.8, I would probably keep it, but I'm afraid that it's just not worth the money at this point because, well, there are other variants out there that are cheaper or the same price that are much sharper. Anyway, hopefully this video was informative and helpful. Feel free to comment your opinions, like, share the video, and if you don't like the video, just double click on the dislike button. I'll see you all next time.